So thank you so much for coming, everyone. We're really excited to see you. This is the German team's first national awareness raising seminar. Yeah, and just to let you know, this webinar is being recorded and it will be available online afterwards. So welcome to our project, Focus on Men. It's a project which is a 2-year project spread across 6 European partner countries, and we're focusing on gender-based violence prevention through intervention and capacity building programs. Despina is going to go more into the project in her section, but I thought I'd just give you an introduction now. Our methods are intersectional and inclusive, and our target group is men from the migration and refugee population. Throughout the project, we are developing quality standards and tools for gender sensitive and violence prevention programs, and we're working on capacity building programs as well for professionals who work with refugees in gender, migration, education, and violence prevention programs. So just quickly about our goals for the FOMEN project. So through our intervention program and our capacity building program, we are looking to gain an insight into the gendered impacts of the refugee crisis in Europe. We want to develop gender sensitive prevention services, improve existing services, motivate male migrants and refugees to become allies in gender equality through role model approaches, and ultimately to prevent violence. So just a quick overview also of what we've done so far. We've carried out a lot of research within the first year of the project on the needs of male migrants and professionals. We've looked into best practices. We've got implementation of national reports and the education program and toolkit. And the next steps which we're working on are capacity building program, intervention program, and webinars, and further talking to professionals. So just a quick overview of our structure. We have the first part, which is the FOMEN project approach and implementation with Despina, who is part of the FOMEN team from Greece. I'm just going to read you an introduction. Despina is the founder of the Symbiosis School of Political Studies in Greece, affiliated to the Council of Europe network of schools. Despina served as education specialist at the UNICEF Refugee and Migrant Response in Greece, advisor to the Regional Cooperation Council, Political Department in Sarajevo, and senior expert to the Roma Integration 2020 in Belgrade. She has been a visiting fellow at the Amsterdam Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies and director of research and international cooperation at the Immigration Policy Institute in Greece. Despina worked amongst others with Reuters and Athens News, the Berlin Migration Netzwerk, Oxford Refugee Studies Centre, and British Council on Intercultural Education, Human Rights, Migration, Refugees, Borders, and the integration of the Western Balkans to the European Union. She has cooperated with the OSCE, ODHIR, Council of Europe, and the EU Fundamental Rights Agency. Despina taught political science and political anthropology at the American College of Thessaloniki and has published journal articles and book chapters, research papers, and documentaries. Despina is part of the Symbiosis FOMEN team, and we're really excited to have her with us today. Thank you for joining us. After the first section, we're going to go on to an anti-racism session with Daliah, where you will challenge your own bias when working with migrant men. We would ask you for this session to please have a pen and piece of paper ready, because you're going to be invited to reflect on your own experiences and challenge your own biases. You don't have to share this, it's just for yourself, but just if you need to get some paper now and a pen, that would be good. Let me introduce you to Daliah. Daliah has an MSc degree in Violence, Conflict and Development from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London. She has been working in the humanitarian field as a gender empowerment, equality and sexual and gender-based violence advisor, specialized on refugee assistance in Lesbos, as well as Sahel and MENA region. Daliah has experience working with sexual and gender-based violence and human trafficking victims under heavy environments and uses an intersectional approach in her work. Daliah is part of the WWP EN FOMEN team in Germany as an expert researcher and advisor. After this session, we're going to have a round for questions and discussion. And I would invite you, if you have any questions during any of the presentations, maybe you can write them down or send them in the chat and we'll get to them afterwards, like within the 2 question sessions. And our final session will be intercultural competencies when working with migrant men with Mahmoud. Mahmoud was born in Syria and now lives in Germany, where he works as a cultural mediator and provides workshops on toxic masculinity and feminism in the Arab male world. Mahmoud has experience working in fundraising, strategy development, and community leading for Thighs of Steel, a ride that raises money for grassroots refugee projects via cycling. In addition to this, Mahmoud was a project manager at the community center in Athens. He also has experience in journalism and as a translator in the Samos camp. And Mahmoud is part of the WWP EN FOMEN team here in Germany as a cultural mediator. So this is our workshop today.
I think Francesca laid down the ground very well, describing wonderfully and succinctly the project as it stands. This is a European Commission project, which is co-funded by the Rights, Equality and Citizenship Program of the European Union. And its aim is, title is Preventing Violence, focusing on refugee men. The focus is on men, but why are we focusing on refugees? The displacement and breakdown of social structures that are the results of flight from war and from conflict challenge traditional gender relations, social norms and ties, making refugees more vulnerable to further violence and discrimination. On their way, in their itinerary, but also in the countries which they cross and where they arrive and attempt to settle. Displaced women and girls have faced multiple forms of violence because of conflict, persecution, and displacement. And having worked in the refugee response in Greece, there are many different projects focusing on women and girls. They're never enough, but they are part of the humanitarian intervention operations, a standard part, and occasionally they become the focus when funding dictates so. Focus on men is extremely rare, if ever there. Yet men and boys suffer violence in countries of crisis, yet also of asylum, especially at the hands of other men. So discussing and focusing on men is really a necessity, and it is a gap. That's what this project is trying to address. My organization, which started in 2011, really sprang from a project on intercultural education, which brought together 40 different actors, what we call stakeholders in the city of Thessaloniki, from migrants and refugee associations, individuals, universities, local authorities, or civil society organizations that work on migration and with migrants. And after a year of meeting together every Sunday, we realized that what was really missing there is migrants and refugees having their own voice. So that is why a focus on refugees and migrants is so important. This particular project is actually situated within something we cannot ignore, which is the COVID-19 pandemic, which has changed all our lives and has also changed the lives of refugees and migrants. Speaking about asylum seekers and refugees in the country where I reside, which is Greece at the moment, in most refugee facilities, not only in the islands, but also in the mainland where the majority resides, people have been locked down in the facilities, in the camps, almost since mid-March, end of March, with very, very completely limited access to movement. And it does make a huge difference when you live in a container with 6 other people, a container that is 20 square meters, than if you live in a flat that is bigger or a house. It makes a difference if you are in a city, a town, or you're in the countryside where you can go to the park, or you can walk by the sea promenade, or you can sort of drive around, and whether you are in a refugee camp where there is very few, if any, common facilities. So lives of refugees are differently affected, and space does matter. What are the general impacts of the pandemic? We are all familiar with this: increased stress level, mental health, possible death, losing loved ones, job insecurity, financial instability, losing touch with nature and friends. Policy measures result really very often in victims of violence being trapped with their users when home stops being a shelter, but it becomes very often, or quite often, a trap where victims are further isolated. Below you have some figures, and of course most of the international organizations have done policy briefs and reports about this, which you can find online. Of course, a pandemic maybe does not discriminate, but brings definitely discrimination to the fore. Migrants and refugees are likely to be subjected much more to violence because of the imposition of traffic bans and quarantine. And of course, misinformation about the spread of COVID-19 affects negatively the spread of xenophobia and discrimination, because refugees and asylum seekers and migrants are often the usual scapegoats for many of the bad things that happen in this world. So what challenges does the lockdown bring to traditional masculinity approaches? Restrictions to public life. Men participate still more than women in public life. Women or other, my purpose is not to discuss gender, but of course, when I talk about men and the others, I assume an understanding that gender is something that is socially constructed, that it includes many different others in it. So the traditional role of a man of being a breadwinner with the suspension of productive work comes into question. On the contrary, care and reproductive work is positioned in the center. So a role that traditionally women play, both as mothers and the female in the household, but also as carers. Most nurses, most cleaners are still women. Strength sufficiently control all these stereotypical things that men are supposed to be endowed with become questioned. There is a lot of fear, a lot of vulnerability, both being attributes and feelings that are prohibited to men in traditional culture. The resulting in overreaction by some men with possible use of violence, many different types of violence, and an increased sense, because of social isolation, of impunity. Many perpetrators feel that they will not get caught because they will not be seen, heard, or they can go ahead with practicing violence. Psychological consequences on victims of violence, burden on the mental health, depression, possible drug and alcohol addiction, while for people with mental health problems, as with people with disabilities, conditions get much worse. So our project has been situated in this context. So we have the context of the 6 different countries where the project is taking place, 6 different partners in Austria, in Germany, in Croatia, in Spain, in Italy, and in Greece, having, of course, the Gender Studies Department of the University of Bristol as a knowledge provider, and I'm happy that Emma is with us so she can sort of jump in and complement. my presentation. So we have 6 different contexts within a different overall context, which is the context of the pandemic. The time span of the project started from September 2019, was supposed to end in August 2021, extended until the end of the year, as most things in our lives tend to become these days, extended into the future until further notice. Francesca spoke about the goals of the project. The focus is on gender sensitivity and prevention of gender-based violence, on raising awareness, and with, I would say, bringing to the fore migrant and refugee men. I like the euphemism of international family history, even though many celebrities also have international family history. I think there is nothing wrong with migrants, the words migrants and refugees. On the contrary, these are terms that we have to defend because they are legal categories that protect people through the Geneva Convention and other international treaties. That we fought very hard to arrive to this point of having protection for asylum seekers and refugees. So all these people are going to be reached through participatory intervention and capacity building programs. Of course, there is also capacity building seminars for professionals. Again, using the example of Greece, many of the younger generation of psychologists, social workers, lawyers, teachers have been thrown into this so-called refugee crisis response since 2015, mostly a reception crisis, a European reception crisis. I would say a European integration, refugee integration and migrants integration crisis these days. And escaping the specter of unemployment after the 10 years of austerity and economic breakdown in Greece. So amongst the professionals in Greece, you have the younger generation that is really acquiring its first professional experiences working with asylum seekers, refugees, and migrants. What a better way to become really empathetic and to really learn the tools of working with human beings. So more specific goals to gain an insight on the gender aspects of what happens with refugees and migrants, to develop gender sensitive prevention programs, develop existing services. In some countries, there are no services for men. Yes, they exist in Germany. Yes, they exist in Austria. But in Greece, for example, we have no specific legal and institutional framework for male gender violence, and we have no services that are focusing on men in the general population. I think that what is also very important is to note that it is a project that has at its core the intention of giving migrants and refugees a voice. Maybe through role models, maybe through intercultural mediation, but as the project unfolds, we feel more and more the need to include in the experts teams refugees and migrants. And this is really an achievement of this project. So what the project, of course, follows a methodology of development. It started with focus group discussions and experts workshops and experts interviews and a quantitative research with closed-ended questionnaires to assemble the knowledge and assess the state of art, what exists out there in the 6 partner countries. And all this research will form the basis upon which the methodology, particularly the educational programs, will be designed and implemented. And the educational programs, as I said, are supposed to be addressing both professionals and male refugees and migrants. In my view, the educational programs for male refugees and migrants are going to be the real challenge for the experts as well. Since in some of the countries, refugees are not really the people that psychologists and social workers have as usual interlocutors. Okay, the qualitative research was based on 3 axes: the needs and interests of male migrants, the needs of professionals working with male migrants, and some examples of good practice at European level. The quantitative research, and you can see sample profiles here, for example, the distribution of the sample by countries: Spain, Austria, Croatia, Germany, Greece, Italy. It's only natural that in Greece you have more respondents, since we have a much bigger refugee population, about 80,000 people at the moment for a much smaller country. So more professionals involved in this type of work. Gender, mostly female, answered our questionnaires. And the professions, you can see them here. Doctors, I assume, is medical doctors. Even some anthropologists and sociologists, mostly psychologists, of course. And here you see the field of activities of the experts: migration and cultural education, gender masculinities, violence prevention. So quite cross-sectoral, quite interdisciplinary, I would say. The conclusions and recommendations of the research highlighted that there is a need for much deeper understanding of the migrants and refugees' current situation. Too much work is being designed based on assumptions and not on a deep understanding of what really happens with migrants and refugees, what they think, what they feel, how they live in reality. The impact of their experiences during the flight or migration process: a lot has been written about the traumas, yet trauma is mostly explored in a theoretical level and less based on real interaction with refugees and migrants. And the gender and family roles in relation to social norms, stereotypes, the past and current circumstances. Of course, the approaches, oops, I went too fast, have to be non-discriminatory, take into consideration the cultural background of the participants, the experts as well. And of course, communication and the need to overcome language barriers is very important. Thus, the increased understanding on the part of the project partners for refugees and migrants to become involved as experts, starting with intercultural mediators, but hopefully later on as psychologists, social workers, sociologists, anthropologists as well. And what is one of the most important recommendations is that experts definitely need further training and capacity building. And the reality is that across the 6 countries, few of the participants consider themselves adequately trained and prepared to work with men for a violence prevention program. And in some cases, they have expressed this need to their managers. I know this is the case in Greece. Yet they get ignored. Very often possibly in the pressure of trying to deliver results that are measurable and can lead to further funding for their organizations. Conclusions: raise awareness in the fields of migration, non-discrimination, femininity, patriarchy, and masculinities. Of course, the implementation should always contain interactive tools such as role-playing and case studies, provide more information about the national and European policies regarding migration, gender-based violence, because often there is a lack of the basic knowledge, and this should be done again and again, sort of in regular training sessions with material readily available online, and training making the participants feel safe and protected. This is also true for professionals. Professionals also need to feel safe and protected, particularly when they work in adverse conditions like on the Aegean Islands. Interactive activities can be the implementation mode. So this is how we are building our capacity building for professionals programs. That is how we are starting to think about our education programs for migrants and refugees. I think Daliah's and Mahmoud's presentations are going to speak much more about this. But what this project has shown, particularly to me, is the need to actually debunk our own stereotypes of how we do male prevention, gender-based prevention, violence work. How many of, how things have moved very, very swiftly. The COVID pandemic has brought new things to the fore, the digital turn, all the insecurities and all the uncertainties about control, about also economic future, but also about the ways we exercise our professions and we undertake activities and projects. I will leave it to that and discuss more with you hopefully later on.
So now we have the anti-racism session with Daliah, and if you, like I said at the beginning, if you have a paper and a piece of paper and a pen, so you can write some of your own reflections whilst we go through the presentation. Thanks, Daliah.
Hello, everyone. Can you all see my screen? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Well, hello again. Very, very warm welcome from my side again. And thank you so much for introducing me, Frankie. So as Frankie already said, I'm a SOAS graduate and specialized on violence particularly. And I have also worked in Camp Moria in Lesbos, where I was mainly specialized in sexual gender-based violence, human trafficking, intervention programs with male refugees, and perpetrator work and work with victims of torture. So for this part of the webinar, I kindly ask you with an open mind to get comfortable, to be uncomfortable. And if you can, as Frankie already said, please kindly have a pen and paper ready and look out for the reflection questions that I will ask throughout this presentation. And please know that this is a safe space and a brave space, and there is no judgment. We're all here to learn. So if you want to share your answers, you're more than welcome. I'd be delighted to hear them. But if you don't, it's also totally fine. So, okay, sorry. So firstly, I would like to discuss the goals of the section. The section aims to challenge your own bias towards male refugees, especially during gender-based violence prevention. And it's also there to challenge your own racial power dynamics between you as a facilitator and the person of concern with migration background. And lastly, I'll invite you to explore your own bias, to experience your experience of race and culture in your own professional behavior. So what is the importance of anti-racism training? When you work with refugees, you need to consider that almost all of them have experienced racism in their lives, whether it's mild or severe. You also need to consider that power dynamics always take place when you work with someone who is of refugee background. not recognizing this can disrupt the flow of the work you do and the trust between you and the person of concern. And also we need to learn to look at our own biases and how they eventually affect our work. I will dive deeper into this later. So the first point I want to discuss is the difference between being non-racist and being anti-racist. So many of us, and hopefully all of us here, can confidently say that we're non-racist. However, how many of us are truly anti-racist? We need to understand that racism is multi-layered. It appears in many ways that most of us don't really see as it's the norm of our society, other than the basic definition that describes racism as hateful treatment against others. It needs to be understood that racism appears in systemic structures. It can be employment, housing, healthcare, socioeconomic disparities, criminal justice, education, and so on. And especially those who are displaced or even undocumented suffer from these systemic layers of racism. So the first point I want to discuss is the difference between being non-racist and being anti-racist. So for that, I prepared a few examples. Stephen believes that all humans have the same right to be respected and tolerated. He does not discriminate or hate people based on their ethnic or any other background. Layla is actively doing work to combat racism. She addresses organizational structures, attitudes, and policies at her workplace. So what's the difference between Stephen and Layla? Stephen may not be actively racist, however, she is complicit in benefiting, he is complicit in benefiting from privileges that are given to him because of systemic racism. So how can we become anti-racist? What you see here are different zones in the process of becoming anti-racist. Moving from the fear zone to the learning zone means that you grow your knowledge and awareness on racial inequality and reflect your personal role that may uncover how you benefited from the system. This requires listening to people of color or refugees or the marginalized population. Moving to the growth zone is often considered the, well, kind of uncomfortable, awkward process. This is mainly because it requires you to question your own bias, your own position, and your own participation in racism, whether it's direct or indirect. So once you reach the growth zone, you are aware of racial inequality and your own role of white privilege in your society. So now you can start from that point on with meaningful action to actually achieve change. Which leads us to the question, how can we be anti-racist when working with refugees? Firstly, it is essential for us to comprehend our privileges, their roots, their impact on the marginalized communities as we play a role in inequality, whether we want it or not. Also, we need to actively challenge racist systems, even the invisible ones around us. And this is only possible when we learn to examine our own conscious and unconscious bias. And of course, when we stop being defensive. So now the question is, what is systemic racism? Many of you probably recognize these terms as they popped up a lot more frequently this year due to the Black Lives Matter movement. However, what many do not consider is that systemic racism concerns all people of color and especially refugees. These factors of systemic racism are usually cause and effect of white privilege. Whenever I mention the term white privilege to workers who work with the migration population, the initial reaction is kind of a slight cringe or awkward moment, because many people, especially from the NGO sector, tend to disassociate themselves from these terms. So the question now is why? So let's break down these two words. The word white makes most people uncomfortable because they have never been described or defined by their race before, because whiteness is a societal norm, and movies and supermarkets and advertisement and so on. And the word privilege is creating a discomfort because people amongst lower working classes or the poor population usually disassociates from it because they are not having any economic privileges. So they don't really see the difference between economic privilege and racial privilege. I often bring up the example that you can be white and poor, but you cannot be poor because you are white, which shows the essential difference in that aspect. White privilege is both a legacy and a cause of racism. It became part of our daily lives, and it's normalized in our society, and it's part of it's part of the systemic structure in our society, as we know. Now, let us try to understand what it means to be a male refugee in a Western world. How does the world perceive you? So male refugees are more likely to be randomly selected, interrogated, and searched by the police because they appear to be suspicious. Male refugees are often refused housing by landlords. It doesn't matter if they have the economic resources. Male refugees are often denied entry in nightclubs and are therefore excluded from social activities. Personal faults or missteps by refugees are most likely to be denied opportunity and even demonized in the media, as we know. If refugees are accused of a crime, likelihood of them being presumed guilty prior to the trial is very likely. And male refugees are often denied psychological assistance. Symptoms of PTSD are disregarded as they're not categorized as urgent, vulnerable groups, which often happens at their reception centers when they arrive, which I have made a lot of experiences with, where we had to deny hundreds of vulnerable male refugees, which of course ended up in massive chaos and even violence. So now, many of us who already work with refugees might think, why are you telling me these facts? We already know, which is why I would kindly remind you that this is to understand the target group and to understand our own power dynamic, which leads us to talk about white exceptionalism. So what is white exceptionalism and how does it affect our work? It's the belief that we are exempt from the effects and benefits of white supremacy because we are the good ones. And therefore, we believe that the work of anti-racism does not apply to us because we already do the work with the refugees. We're non-racist, so that must be enough. It's also the belief that we are special because we are not racist, and therefore we do not need to dig deeper. And it's the urge to respond with not all white people when refugees complain about the experiences of day-to-day racism. So let's reflect for a moment. I kindly invite you all for this reflection round. Think back to your childhood. How did society teach you white exceptionalism? Or even, I would go a step further, what makes you believe that you are exempt from white supremacy or from the work of anti-racism? What makes you special? So this is just for yourself, but if anyone wants to give an input, raise a hand or write a comment in the chat. I'm happy to hear your comments. So there's this famous quote. It says, if you believe you're exceptional, you will not do the work. If you do not do the work, you will continue to do harm, even if it's not your intention. You can
mute myself. Yeah. So I don't know if this is exactly what you're thinking of, but what it reminded me of was this whole, what already kids are taught is to sort of support. I'm thinking of like the typical UNICEF advertisements, support the NGOs to help poor people, and then when you grow a little older, that extends to volunteerism and those kinds of practices.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, actually. This is white saviorism, and it's a really excellent point because it derives from white exceptionalism. And we will dive deeper into this in a bit, but yeah, really excellent point. Chloe, yes?
Hello from my side as well. So a thought that came into mind was the very romanticized colonialist stories that we were told as children, that back in the old days, there were the white men that went and brought civilization to the rest of the world, and that's why we've expanded as a society. And these were stories that came into my mind, and teachings and schools, families, everywhere.
Excellent, excellent point, Chloe. This is very, very true. The whole colonialist discourse that is always carried out in humanitarian work. Perfect, thank you so much. Anyone else? Okay, then I will move on, but if you have any inputs, you can always put it in the chat or contribute later on. So, many of us have heard the sentence, "I do not see color." It sounds well-intended, but it is actually not. So why should we actually see color? When you claim that you are colorblind, it means that you're also blind to the struggle that refugees and people of color are dealing with due to their status and due to their race and due to the society that we live in. And it is an act of minimization and also an act of erasure of the impact of their skin color and their political status. And most of all, it also means that if you don't see color, then you also don't see your own privilege, which will prevent you from doing the work and from becoming anti-racist and from striving for real change. So here's another reflection round. Now, what do you feel when you hear the words white people? Does it make you feel uncomfortable? Do you disassociate from it? What feeling comes up? What emotion? If you feel like sharing, I'll be really happy. If you just, if you want me to go on, it's also fine. Okay, so I'll move on. If anyone wants to contribute later, I'd be glad to hear. Excuse me. Okay, so being colorblind also makes us not see the societal stereotyping of male refugees, and it hinders us from challenging our own bias. So male refugees often face different types of stigmatization that are often connected with their race, but also with their status and displacement. So stereotypes can be them being lazy, sexist, perverts, uneducated, poor, patriarchal, macho, and so on. Why do you need to understand these stereotypes? Because racist stereotypes are used by policymakers, as we probably all know from our own countries, and the media to justify the ill treatment of refugees. Also for yourself, but if you want to share, what stereotypes, beliefs, and thoughts do you often hold about male refugees? I think this is something more for yourself. Or what stereotypes did you have in the past that you needed to change, just for your own reflection? Now, I would like to address the issue of Islamophobia. According to recent data, Islamophobia showed a massive rise within the European Union, and since 2015, which is the beginning of the refugee crisis, it became more and more present in our everyday life. This aspect caused an increase in discrimination of the Muslim population in Europe. Also, specifically men of the refugee population, suffer from Islamophobia. And especially since the so-called Cologne incident, it became even worse, especially for refugee men. And this causes social exclusion, often induced by right-wing politicians who spread anti-Muslim propaganda, which increases the fear of the civil society towards refugees and Muslims in general, as they're being seen as a threat. And this can also, of course, affect your work with refugees. So the question is now, how does Muslim bias affect facilitation work with refugees and gender-based violence work? So firstly, many of us probably recognize Islam is often considered as misogynist and violent, and therefore addressed as such an intervention work. Male refugees are often seen as fanatic, sexist, or patriarchal. Western facilitators often struggle to distinguish between culture and religion. And Islam is considered as disempowering from a Eurocentric point of view, especially when it comes to the feminist agenda, which causes prejudice and can affect the work with male refugees. So also for yourself to reflect on what are my own biases on Muslim men. Take a moment, write them down for yourself. If you want to share them later on, I will be happy to hear. So now I would like to discuss another very invisible factor when working with refugees. Two of you already made amazing hints to that. It's white saviorism. Now I know that that the work, gender-based violence work, is a very sensitive topic in itself. However, we often do not realize when we work from a racially privileged position that we can disrupt this process of, of gender-based violence prevention through our own behavior. So what is white saviorism? It's the idea that refugees are inferior in their capability, intelligence, and self-determination as compared to Western people, and therefore they need saving for their helplessness, which is a very colonial approach, actually. It's also well-meaning white people, white workers, or white facilitators who have no understanding of historic, cultural, religious, or social background, and therefore impose Western standards on refugees without listening to their needs. I wrote white workers and white facilitators, but it can also be a person like me, who is a person of color, but who was born and raised in a Western world, of the Eurocentric Western discourse that we sometimes impose on the people of concern. So what is white saviorism in action? It's the habit to speak or to decide on behalf of the refugees' needs and program development instead of asking them about their goals and their needs and give them ownership in the process. That actually also would help them to identify with the process better. Now I know that in gender-based violence work, we need to guide the process as it's a very sensitive topic. However, it would be beneficial for the participants to be able to identify with the process through mutual goal setting for the improvement. So to not become the voice of in our work. So what are the first steps to combat anti-racist behavior in my role when working with the refugee population? So firstly, we need to reflect on our own biases and values. We need to ask ourselves, what values do I hold that hinder my ability to practice anti-racism? And secondly, honesty is the key. Reflect on your own prejudice and stereotyping about male refugees. If possible, get ready to list them, confront them, and most importantly, change them within time. And also consider giving leadership of intervention programs to professionals who are people of color, actually, or of the same background of the target group. Create a target group. And very important, include cultural mediators in your program preparation. Ask them for input and try to find a middle ground to make your work culturally sensitive. So how can we implement anti-racism in our organization? We need to create brave and safe spaces for our team members where we can exchange. We need to comprehend the power dynamics between the refugee population and ourselves that we work with, and also provide materials to our colleagues so they can always learn and progress. And we need to create sustainability by ongoing learning and long-term transformation and goal setting, actually, mutual goal setting with your team members. Hey, what do we want to achieve and how can we change? And to acknowledge the milestones, really important to acknowledge them, to display them, and so to create new milestones until you actually can say, okay, we achieved our goal in an appropriate anti-racist approach and also culturally sensitive approach when working with a refugee population. So to develop your organization's cultural competency, it's important to reach out to organizations that are specialized in refugee support and diversity. You can also get in touch with refugee facilities and cooperate with social workers or even community leaders of the refugee population. I really recommend. Work together with cultural mediators, as said before, and sign up for anti-racism webinars that are longer than this and more intense and more reflective. I highly recommend them for everyone. Yes, and that was it. Those are helpful resources. If you have any questions afterwards, please feel free to ask. You can also contact me after this webinar. Thank you very, very much.
I hope that you are doing all okay. I'm today with you to be your eye-opening on the Middle Eastern culture and joining with this amazing program that's focused on men. And we are going to start with the general vision of male culture in the Middle East and the view on social-based violence and gender equality. And as all of us know that the toxic masculinity and the migration population for the Middle Eastern culture that has the idea of being a man, it's all over the world the same. Men shall be strong, don't show emotion, don't cry, and there's like be provider of for your family and other, and don't be submissive. And those, as we all know, this is the main thing for the toxic masculinity. That's basically it could, basically it could create all of this like what we are going through. And the migration population for the Middle East region adds even more pressure, such as being responsible for the family owner. What is a family owner? Family owner is an abstract concept involving the perceived quality of worthiness and respectably that affect the social standing and the self-evaluation of a group of related people, both corporate or and individually. And that's like be clear in so many like clan community too. And plus to this, the culture, that Middle Eastern culture add to the men, that men are expected to own properties by married and have the foundation for building a family in the age between 20 to 25. Men not only are they have to be provider for their own family, wife and children, but also for their parents and distant family too. Some ideas are taught very offensively, other resonate in the background. Not fulfilling their expectation is often their biggest fear. This biggest fear is like, and anything could destroy their image and their regard is meet with aggression and immediate defense, even being either being ignored or react within violence. Gender equality and culture. The migrant population from the Middle East include many different nations, culture and religion and social communities differ from area to area, even within the same country and even in the same city. We have all of us this stereotype about Arabs, like Middle other stereotype that we got from the media, from some reports, and all of this like make everyone confused. I have a personal story of mine that shows us like it's a bit different. Like for example, in my family, we have like my dad was like every day was helping my mom in everything in her like the household thing that to help her before he goes to work. My parents break this gender rule and let us always like as siblings, boys and girls, like help each other, support each other in so many different ways. And they break it, especially we were surrounding in culture that strict with this gender rules. And there's another big thing that we suffer from as Middle Eastern, the shame culture. The shame culture is again like among the Middle Eastern communities. It's called basically Aib culture. What does Aib mean? And what does it do to men and women in the culture? Definition of shame culture. Shame culture is typically based on the concept of pride and honor. Appearances are what count. In a fair society control, it's kept by the fear of reputation, fear, power, worldview, focus on physical dominance. And as a person in this culture may ask, will someone hurt me if I do this? And this question be asked a lot. Women and men are asked to cover their sexual part while they are, from like little age, from when they are children and like little kids when they are showering. This is already predetermined at this putative of shame and indeed to associate to the topic like sex. So kids, they are scared of their like private parts, sexual private parts and everything around it. So you are scared of sex. Women are asked to behave properly, not a provocative way or to protect the family honor. Men are asked to behave properly and protectively toward female family members to protect the family honor. Both men and women are taught to keep relationships, conflicts, and family issues private as is considered as shameful. No one allowed to talk about their problem outside family. No one are allowed to involve the family issues and discuss with a friend or someone outside the family. Considered as well shameful for men to have sex outside of marriage, supposedly for both gender. So in clan community, maybe some of you wonder what's clan community. Clan community is a group of people. They are one family, but big family. They are kind of like start from 5,000 people and more, and we call them clan. It's not following their family leaders well and expectations. For a man to study certain subject in universities such as acting, art, or philosophy, it's kind of for some clan too is forbidden. For a man to marry a woman outside of his family, it's as well shameful. What cultural boundaries do I need to take in account when working with Arab refugee men on topic of sexuality, gender equality, and partnerhood? Don't criticize culture and traditions. Don't diminish their value. Instead, take into account the feeling of the target group. It's so important to not your culture like this, you act like this, and your traditions like you are doing this is wrong. When talking about the subject of women, one should consider the side of men and speak in a gender-based equality way. For example, discuss in a way men do not feel attacked and automatically withdraw from the conversation. What culture taboos should we avoid when working with male, from the Middle Eastern male, in a topic like sex, gender equality? Considering the culture differences, we shall not speak about sex and sexuality in a too comfortative or provocative way, which could make the recipient feel uncomfortable since they may engage in such a conversation for the first time in their life. The abuse of women does not stem from Islam and the Quran itself. It's rather a problem of society. So in order to get through to the recipient mind, rather call upon their empathy and discuss social constructions and how it is with them. For example, could be to ask them to write a letter to your wife or to your daughter. And this is so important because you don't get involved in a conversation about Islam or tradition or religion that may reflect another feeling that the participants stop listening or take any information, and that may move the workshop to a different way that no one wants to go. And do not question cultures and tradition in a patronizing or westernizing manner. Rather create an open conversation which you let the participants reflect on themselves. Possibly let them point out positive and problematic aspect of culture. Generally, do not direct this discussion toward Middle Eastern men and the culture, like the culture they are supposedly from or live in. You cannot generalize many culture from these regions. It may also comes across as racial based, rather direct the conversation toward men as individuals. Because it's so important, because everyone thinks to the Middle East as one area, one place, in like all of them speak the same language, but they are really, really, really different. Different like culture, different languages, different nation, and different traditions too. How do I build culture bridge when working with migrant from the Middle East and on the topic like gender-based violence, sex and gender equality? Initially, it's important to introduce a person of the same gender as their person of reference, somebody they can relate and to compare themselves to. It's so important to they have someone when they look at, they feel like look like us. He understands us, has the same language. We understand him. We can see ourselves in him, and this is such important point that we can go through to achieve more succeed in our workshop. Respecting their ages, their opinions, while trying to discuss the topic that are being criticized in a friendly manner. We have all, like, while we are giving this workshop, we try always to break all this gender rules and all the stereotype and all of like what we call it like all tradition that we don't really need it, like, but we still have to respect their ages. I cannot talk to someone in 50 or 60 or 80 years old in the same way as I'm talking to someone 20 or 15 years old. They may be all in one workshop. And ask the participant question about what gender equality and gender-based violence mean to them. And most importantly, take their answer seriously without projecting your own prejudices and bias on them. Considering the Middle Eastern background, topics like sex and intimacy may be highly sensitive and not talked about in an open manner. This is why it's important to spend more time with the participant and try to make them feel comfortable when talking about such topics. It's so important to create this atmosphere, and that could help to create more interaction with the participants and to create this nice, wonderful space that they may feel comfortable and share more and more and give more and understand and take more from the workshop. You as a facilitator with the same culture background to avoid Western and colonial narrative in the training. So important. Daliah have mentioned this, and we are mentioning here too, because so important to we move away from this Western and colonial narrative that's always being exists in every workshop. Personally, I have attended and I have been in, and I face this thing like in everything, basically in every day in my life in Europe. Even though culture and religion should never be brought into in the center of discussion, and nonetheless important to get a better understanding of every individual background in order to adjust the way we speak to them. So important. And generally, it would be good to approach to start talking about topics like gender equality or even domestic violence from a more emotional, personal, and eye-level perspective that may drive them again emotionally and support them to engage with you and bring another way and help you to manage this workshop to better way. Keep trying to hold the workshop from participant perspective, especially when introducing the topic gender equality. Speak about the relief and joint work forces could bring about when fundamental beliefs such as religions or cultural beliefs are brought up don't dismiss them, and rather find ideal comparison and alternative to those concerns. Try to call up on the men empathy when speaking about women aspirations. When it comes even more sensitive topics like domestic violence, it can be beneficial to describe specific sensor like the participant can relate to. Again, show understanding before realizing them in a way that I understand you. I know that you go through this and it is hard, but don't make it because they are going through this like hard time that they are allowed to act in this way, but we have it in different ways that make them feel that we understand this, but this shouldn't be okay. And we have to work together to move it in a different way and try to interact with all of this pressure and all of this that we can't, all of this like, let's call it like bad perspective or ideas and change it to better perspectives. I speak about how aggression stems from like trying to hide weaknesses. When a man is become violent, he may feel like he is losing control, which he was taught all his life to keep it up. Their last resort is violence. Always men being grown, me too. Stay strong, don't show emotion. Whatever, you have to be strong. Everything will be fine. As soon as you are strong, you will go through. You will succeed. All this pressure is like so many people interact with it with violence, and this is what happened in the end. It's of course also important to then question the idea of men being allowed to hit women. Why can't she hit back? Why cannot she, hit back? Discuss and question the answer because we are men. Why do we have this? And let's question it with the participant or the target group. What word I can and cannot use when working with those topics, sex and gender equality. It's simply important to talk about these topics with respectable and professional language. Then all the words are allowed. There's no, as soon as I'm professional, all the words are allowed. It's hard to generalize what specific words you can or you cannot use, as this differs from area to area. But as long as the language remains professional and moral appropriate, there shouldn't be any specific limitation. It's especially important to consider whether or not the participants are attending such a workshop voluntarily, or maybe in the frame of an integration course. If they are not attending voluntarily, be extremely careful to not bring any racial bias on the table. So important. Personal experience of mine, I have been forced to attend an integration course to learn how to eat in Europe. I refused because I felt insulted because I eat same as everyone else. And this is like, I felt it as insultment, this course. I get punishment because I didn't attend this course, but in the end, it's kept inside of me and makes me feel more comfortable to myself and more respectable to myself instead of attending this type of course. Words to use. What I can use during my workshop with the target group. All medical scientific word for the body part, the same respectful language you would use with people from any other background. As soon as we are on this field using all this professional word, we can use any word we have, and some other word like empowerment, development, participation, equality, parenthood, partnership too. Make clear that the goal is not being anti-man or diminishing a man's rules, but to give more freedom and equal opportunities to the female part of the population that could move all the population forward. Word to not use any vulgar description of words of the human body part. Don't make allegations such as your culture is like this or that because of your religion, believe this or that. Try to not bring them there, not use them at all. Don't prejudge mental in your choice of words. Don't base any of your statement on assumptions. Since you are from the Middle East, you are used to treat your wife like this or like that. So important to not bring, it's like, as Daliah mentioned, we come with all of this thing and we feel that we know all better or whatever. Then we start to bring all this prejudgmental ideas about the other and we start bringing them to those workshops. Sometimes I face it in so many professional workshops and it was like really like frustrating. Do not quote the Prophet Muhammad or the Quran for that matter if you are not eligible or have enough knowledge to speak on Islam. The reason being that Quran is often being misinterpreted and it wouldn't be wise to engage in such discussion. No racist wording or statement. For example, here in Europe, men respect their wives, and this is kind of like disrespectful to the other people and try to not be in eye level. Don't ask a question about their personal relationship, especially including their potential wives, daughters, sisters, or mothers. What aspect do I need to be sensitive and alert when working with migrant men? An issue of sex, gender equality, domestic or parental violence. From a young age on, the topic of sex or intimacy is implanted into our head. Like I'm considering myself one of them too, because the society implemented in your head as being shameful and forbidden outside of marriage, like the sex topic, all of it. This is almost creates some sort of fear around the sexual intercourse. Be aware around the topic of virginity, and it's important in some culture. When wanting to talk about virginity in relation to gender equality, maybe question why it is culturally forbidden to have sexual intercourse before marriage for both gender. Why is preliminarily like intercourse more more like for it's allowed or acceptable for men than more than women, and always create open conversation rather than lecture. And when it's raising a topic discussion, it's in all its aspects and perspectives. It more makes the participants feel that they are engaged, that people care about their opinions and their thoughts too. Do not speak about the participants' way of like parenting and like diminishing or like patronizing manner. Do not make any assumptions about the participant's personal behavior. Speak about it as an issue of the society, not as their own behavior. What do we need to consider when hiring a culture mediator while working with these specific topics? He or she must be able to stay objective, have insight and a great understanding of all aspects of culture and its differences in the whole like migration population from the Middle Eastern region. Because as I mentioned, from place to another place is totally different, even from one city to another city, even from in the like big cities. It may be in this area are different from the other area. And another example, I lived in the street, every like one wear whatever they want to wear, girls wearing skirt, and literally after 2 street, you go away 2 street, you see women wearing burqa, and this is how people live. We have to have this talented like culture mediator that could understand all this perspective too. Be both empathetic toward the participant and supporting the respective case. Be highly relatable to the respective audience. Someone, as we mentioned, from them, I feel related. When I go to any like workshop, I see like talking about this issue and I see culture mediator, I feel like he could understand every single thing about me and my culture. It make it way easier. The facilitator who works with the culture mediator needs to consider the following. Discuss the topic with the culture mediator prior to the workshop so they have an understanding and overview, especially when it's a socially and culturally challenging topic. Make the culture mediator comfortable by not using intrusive words, especially when it comes to sexuality. These terms needs to be prior discussed, and in a middle way of translating them needs to be found. We cannot just like I translate this word as what the culture mediator wanted, or like the facilitator, or even who holding this workshop, because sometimes it's hard to translate it as it is, because it may create like some issues and may the participant doesn't like it or be vulgar for them or whatever. It's possibly avoid using culture mediators from opposite gender. May some of you feel like this is not cool or is not fine, but basically if I want a successful workshop, I have to keep these things like up, that men with men, so we have the culture mediator, amen, so it's like, so they can interact with and communicate in a better way, because of all these cultural rules in front of them, being in a like in easy communication with a woman, it's a bit hard. What words would be difficult for a mediator to translate due to culture restrictions? Neologism in relation to gender equality, gender science, and sexuality, such as cisgender, heteronormative, and queer. They are hard, and even like until today, like sometimes, and in a lot of like topics and research, like, or even articles, we use this word. Depending on situations, what way may seem to not be personal for Western culture may indeed be too personal in Middle Eastern culture. Try to avoid personal questions or assumptions about sexual preferences or personal relationships. Thank you, and feel free, please, if you have any question to share with me, and I'm here so I can help all of you to answer all of your questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your presentation. So we have about 5 minutes left, but also if you want to stay like 5 minutes longer, maybe we can answer some more questions. I just have some questions in the chat that we had during your presentation. 1 second, let me find it. We had a question for Daliah, or I guess everyone can answer. How can we discuss gender-based violence in refugee communities from an anti-racism perspective without falling into the racist dominant discourse? If either of you or any of you want to answer.
Okay, I have to read the question. Can you reread it? Sorry.
Yeah, how can we discuss gender-based violence in refugee communities from an anti-racism perspective without falling into the racist dominant discourse?
I think the answer is intensify with resources. Read more on anti-racist resources. Actually dive deeper into the topic, what is considered as anti-racist, and then implement it with the target group. this is actually, I know this is not the answer you might be seeking for, but this is actually one of the things that I can really, really recommend. I really recommend Layla Saad's book, Me and White Supremacy. It's an amazing book. It's amazing for self-reflection. It's very easily written. It gives you sections for each week. And then you can actually dive deeper into anti-racist discourses that you can then later use in your refugee work. But one of the most essential things is to constantly reflect on your own bias. This is also something I had to do, even though I'm myself sharing the same background like many of the refugees. I'm half Iranian, half Palestinian, born and raised in Germany, but still there are certain biases that I was holding due to the fact that I was born and raised in a westernized privileged environment. So this is really what I recommend, the entire work of reflection. And the graph that I showed you, the whole process from learning to growth, it's actually very true, and it's actually very, very helpful, and it works perfectly to actually dive into that process and for yourself and try to take that process later on when you work with the people of concern. When you reach the growth zone, actually don't experiment while you're still in between. But yeah, this is really what I can recommend.
Thank you. We have one more question which came in during Mahmoud's presentation, I think for Daliah. It says, in your experience, what are the best approaches for setting up or sustaining brave safe spaces for our teams in providing anti-racist work to our communities?
Sorry, could you repeat the question again? Sorry, because the signal was...
Yeah, sorry. In your experience, what are the best approaches to setting up or sustaining brave and safe spaces for our teams in providing anti-racist work in our communities?
I think a brave space requires to share feelings. I think this is the first step. The first approach is to set it up in a way that you and your colleagues have a moment where you can share feelings, share frustrations, and even share biases, and that this space is a space of no judgment where everyone can contribute and reflect. So this is the first step. And the second step is to collectively set up a goal setting of, hey, how do we want to change these biases? What do we want to achieve? That everyone has ownership in the process itself as well. So yeah, these would be the first steps. And then, as I said, the milestones, you know, like stick to the milestones, celebrate the milestones, and try to sustain them in the process.
Perfect, thank you. I think we have a question.
Francesca,
yeah.
just to add some, of course, it's very much context specific. I mean, it's different to set up a safe and brave space, closed refugee facility center in Lesbos or Samos, or in, you know, in the south coast of Spain, and very different to set it up in Hamburg or in Berlin or in Athens or in Graz. But I think that what is I mean, safe spaces is usually the terminology, and in this presentation, we have used, in my view, too many jargon words that have entered of our own vocabulary and go very much without us paying much attention to them, like growth, development, empowerment. We have been institutionalized, and you know, we also use it in our everyday language, and sometimes we don't really think about them. So debunking them is quite important, and speaking simply is also very important. But safe spaces are very much used by international humanitarian organizations like UNICEF, like UNHCR, to create sort of tents or spaces where initially they took victims of gender-based violence. Of course, the term now is much, much broader. And it's complemented with brave spaces. Brave spaces cannot exist if you have relations, hierarchical relations, where you have a hierarchy of a facilitator being top, and then the participants or the members of the group being at a lower, less equal relationship. So equality is the basis for this. This is the cornerstone, whether you have it in Lesbos or whether you have it in Berlin.
Thank you. We have a question for Mahmoud, I think. I've carried out domestic violence. This is from Ilona, I think. I've carried out domestic violence reports on refugee women. Sometimes due to language barriers, we have needed to call in translators, and sometimes these were men. How do you think the gender and cultural difference would affect the subject matter of the report?
From my experience as a translator, it's so important to have, like, we still, like, the gender barriers are always there and exist there. And always, it's important to when we have any report about, like, women to have women and men to have men, because the people feel more comfortable. Even we have faced, like, I personally faced so many things that I said that I cannot translate because the person who I'm translating to, it's not comfortable. You can feel. You can see, even which you try so many times to explain that here's safe space, you can say whatever you want, we are here, like, to help you, but in the end, all the gender barriers and all these worries, and they don't feel safe or comfortable to say, like, to mention anything. It's a bit like, it's not being helpful to have better report or whatever we are going to do. Like, sometimes it's better to have women to translate to women and men to translate to men. It's more like, I feel personally, from my own experience, I feel like more helpful and useful. Yeah. I hope that I answered your question correctly.
I have one more question in the chat. Do you think it's helpful to have a man and a woman leading the sessions? This is the model in the perpetrator programs to model respectful relationships between men and women. So I guess to have two people leading the sessions.
Yeah, I think it's like, let's start, like, this is the modern, I think, modern in the Western side. Yeah. Let's start, like, let's go, like, just like step one, it's like step one backwards, and still, like, work men with men in the beginning and women with women. And then we try to modernize everything. And this is what we said, we be far away from the Western manners. And we try to think of this society need this thing and this thing special to this culture and society, and try to work on these rules a little bit. So as soon as we succeeded in, like, our past workshop, and we can try modern things for the future.
I personally
sorry, go on.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. No. I just wanted to say, to add to Mahmoud, I do think we can actually have a mixed gendered, or, you know, those that identify as women, those as men, together as facilitators. I think it's possible. I think you, Mahmoud, are going to do that for the education program. But what I think would be maybe a very helpful aspect to that is that those two people have, if possible, the same background, like the target group, or had a cultural sensitivity training beforehand. In that aspect, I think it would be actually nice. I think it would actually be great dynamic to mix them. Sorry, I interrupted you. I don't know who was
it's okay. I just wanted to actually add to that, because I actually deliver the perpetrator program at the moment, and I deliver it in both Urdu and Punjabi. So I would definitely agree with Daliah that you know, to kind of present that as a female and a male facilitator, both running, co-facilitating and delivering them sessions, actually works brilliantly, and then re-emphasizes gender equality at its best, really. And again, I would totally agree that you do need you know, people of the same culture really leading them sessions, so that the participants can, you know, relate to that, really. Relate to you in terms of your culture and your identity.
Yeah, sorry, I agree. I've also been part of running a Urdu Punjabi group, and we've had two female facilitators actually running the group, because we had real difficulty finding male facilitators to run groups. And Actually, after some initial negotiations and understanding with the group, we were able to do some really good work with them.
Yeah.
And actually co-opted some of the men into the work in terms of thinking about some of the translations, the way that some of the language works. And we found that process alongside them was really helpful too.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. And even the social interaction in terms of interaction with women, they've not had the opportunity to do that. So, I mean, we saw massive progression in these men just from me carrying out a suitability and them being very uncomfortable and sitting on the opposite side to them. 17 weeks later, having a fantastic, being able to hold a fantastic conversation with myself, brilliant eye contact, and getting to know each other. So just on communication on a human level was brilliant.
Thank you so much for your contributions. I would say maybe we can get to the last question, and then if we have time afterwards and people want to discuss more, we could kind of do that, just because I can see there's one more question in the chat. But thank you so much to you two for sharing your experiences as well. I have a question from Chloe. It says, thank you for your presentations. Here in Greece, I'm supervising a protection monitoring team, which is a multicultural and multidisciplinary team. I've often received feedback from male Middle Eastern team members about challenges they face during prevention work in the scope of gender-based violence intervention, particularly a repeated defensive attitude from community members, including language like, just because you work in Europe now, you don't have to act like them. Don't act like you know better now because they pay you. Do you have any advice on how to further support the team in receiving these comments and or share some tools that they can use to overcome these challenges?
This is one of the challenges that make me leave some of my jobs because it's like basically, this is what I mentioned on one slide of my slide, that it's like when you have someone relate to them, they feel that relate to. It's so important to be, as Sophia that mentioned, that someone from their own culture as too, and they like being together with and they feel connected to. But sometimes we have this issue that, oh, you now it's like you are westernized, or you have this whitewash in you now, like you believe in them, you throw your culture behind your back. Actually, this is like need a lot of work, because this thing implement the fear of losing the culture, of losing the tradition, of losing, because some people, they found this like workshop like even against their religion too, because of their own understanding that they have got. And this is like another kind of like struggle we have to face. But personally, I feel like we need to work a lot on this thing by like keep like giving workshop and keep supporting, and because it's still like we have this gap, because some people, they are willing to like to go through this workshop and learn, but some other people, they attend just to see how other people, like I heard this, how they try to brainwash them and use people from their own culture. I heard some of these comments, some of them, they were hurtful, really hurtful, but we have like, I don't know, it's like seriously how the right way really to go through. We're still in the process. You try, like we are learning, and I think it's like big process to go through, because that what implements inside of this people head, it's being since 20, 30, 40 years, and all of this thing you cannot change it in one workshop or whatever. I hope that I helped or respond to your question.
Despina, did you want to add something, or you just wanted to?
No, I totally understand what Chloe means, because this is a response we often also get. But I think that the more migrants and refugees are given take a voice, or their voice is heard, the less they are going to feel that their own kin, their own compatriots, their own people abandon them or betray them when they actually join a professional group. And actually, and this is just for Chloe, I know many professionals of Greek origin that work for international organizations and NGOs in Greece, in the refugee response situation that very often disagree with the fundamentals or the policies of their organization. They still work because this is a job and they have to have a job. This is also an argument.
Thank you very much for your contribution. Okay, I was just seeing one more question. I think I said this is probably the last question because we're already running over. A question for Daliah and Despina. What's your opinion about the fact that during these WWP workshops, the number of men participating was significantly less than the women?
You're speaking of the webinars right now? Are the webinars meant for that? Yes?
I guess the webinars.
Well, I didn't notice, but I see it now that I look at most of you. Yeah, what's my opinion on that? Well, I think it's maybe something important for us to consider on how to increase the participant rate of our male colleagues. I'm not really sure what opinion I have on that. I guess most of them are. I guess most of the people that are now present are particularly working in that field, and I want to hope that is the reason why there are more women present. But yeah, it would be an interesting aspect to consider on how to increase the participant rate of male multipliers, because this is of course for everyone. I don't know if Despina wants to.
Well, I'm actually surprised that there are so many men here. I was expecting much less. That's what we are used to. Because an Emma will probably, deal with that. It's usually women that are interested into questions of gender, or people that are in the LGBTQI plus group, because they feel much more the impact and the repercussions of patriarchy in their own lives. So still they are much more keen to do something about it. But I think this is changing actually. Even in countries that are quite traditional, such as Greece, Haris might have an opinion on this, that more and more men, particularly younger men, are becoming involved in this because their own lives, and it usually comes back to ourselves. And this is why I think Daliah's presentation was so great. We have to start with actually looking to us personally and dealing with our own biases and stereotypes. And the more uncomfortable men feel, the more they're going to join this kind of solidarity.
Sure.
Could I just add to that? Sorry. I think it just echoes what is happening in society still when it comes to, with regards to gender inequality. We like to think and we like to say that we are moving forwards and we've got to this certain aspect where gender is becoming equal and we're getting to this level. But for me, the numbers, it speaks volumes really, the fact that gender equality, still exists massively. And the numbers kind of represent that.
Thank you. I think Haris, you raised your hand. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to say that it makes sense for more women to be here because in the positions that are linked or related with SGBV, they are mostly women, and because it is something that always it was, and it changes, but it's gonna take quite a long time to be a significant change and more men to be involved. And from my perspective, because I worked in Greece with refugees, and it's a sensitive subject for men, and sometimes even though they are they want to protect the rights, they're not involved. They're trying to avoid these subjects or these positions. So of course it has to do with culture, with tradition, and yeah, it's not quite easy to change.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone so much for all your contributions and participating. And thank you so much to all of the presenters. I think it was a really, really interesting and really informative and really needed workshop. We are going to be uploading the recording and the PowerPoints online. I got some questions about that in the chat. And yeah, I just want to say thank you very much again for joining us, and I hope you have a good day, morning, evening, wherever you are in the world.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.